Poets and Pancakes, Part 1 by Asokamitran. Let's explore some characters, actually, three of them. Let's talk about three characters here first: the writer, the office boy, and Kothamangalam Subbu. In those days, I worked in a cubicle, two whole sides of which were French windows. I didn't know at that time that they were called French windows. Seeing me sitting at my desk, tearing up newspapers day in and day out, most people thought I was doing next to nothing. Now, students, here, the author, that is the writer, is talking about himself. What job did he have? He had the job of taking snippets, taking cuttings out of newspapers, and he had a little cubicle. But he is talking sarcastically about himself. Nobody thought big of him. Everybody belittled him. Nobody thought that he was doing something worthwhile. The writer himself. That is the writer of this story, Asokamitran. The boss thought the same as the others did, that this author, this writer, was almost a good for nothing, cutting newspapers and taking out relevant articles in relation with the scripts or the studios that they were running. So anyone who felt I should be given some occupation would barge into my cubicle and deliver an extended lecture. The boy in the makeup department had decided I should be enlightened on how great literary talent was being allowed to go waste in a department fit only for barbers and perverts. Now, here comes a new character which I was about to talk about. This boy came into my cubicle. I am the writer. He came into my cubicle and always talk negatively of the studios, and he had not been given due respect which he thought he deserved. So he always had negative views about the people working over here, that only the barbers and the perverts. Perverts means people who are not in fit minds, who are not in their sane minds. So only the insane or not in the correct frame of mind, the people, the barbers who are just here to cut hair and put on pancakes on the faces of the actors. The office boy shared the same frustration as that of the writer. Both were frustrated since they were neglected, never paid attention, and their work was demeaned, belittled always. They are the ones who are valued here, not the people like you and me. You means the writer, and me means the boy who comes in lecturing me. Soon I was praying for crowd shooting all the time. Nothing short of it could save me from his epics. He would always come and lecture me. Now comes the new and almost the most important character, SUBBU. But where does SUBBU come from? He comes through the mouth of this boy. This boy is always critical of SUBBU, Kothamangalam's name here. Yes. Hurriedly read this whole paragraph and try to bring out the most important parts. In all instances of frustration, you'll always find the anger directed towards a single person, openly or covertly. Openly or covertly. Covertly means secretly, not in open. So, who is the single person on whom everybody directs his or her anger? That is Kothamangalam Subbu. And this character is now to be exposed. Well, and this man of the makeup department was convinced that all his woes, ignominy, and neglect were due to Kothamangalam Subbu. Who is this man so immensely critical of Kothamangalam Subbu? He is the same boy who used to come and lecture me. He is from the makeup department. He thought his woes, ignominy, and neglect. He was neglected in the department. He had all the woes and worries, troubles. Ignominy means bad name. They were because of this boy Kothamangalam Subbu, and now enters this character Subbu, who was considered number 2 at Gemini Studios. Number 2, that means after boss. He could have had a more encouraging opening in films than a grown-up makeup boy had. On the contrary, he must have had to face more uncertain and difficult times, for when he began his career, there were no firmly established film producing companies or studios. I remember this. This is about Subbu. Subbu, this author takes a little sarcastic, or lot of sarcastic, and a little sympathetic view also of Subbu. He says Subbu must have had lot more difficult and uncertain times in the beginning when he just entered and enrolled with this studio. Actually, this line tells us that the writer is empathetic of Subbu as well. He thinks Subbu must have struggled a lot. He struggled more than the office boy. He must have got a job after a lot of struggle. Job at this Gemini studio. Remember the studio's name? Gemini Studios. Okay. He couldn't have had more encouraging opening in films than our grown-up makeup boy had. Okay, although Subbu also was immensely frustrated, he thought himself again more worthy than he got here. He deserved more than what he was getting. He himself thought. Subbu. Even in the matter of education, especially formal education, Subbu couldn't have had an appreciable lead over this boy. Now, two people are pitted against each other. One is Subbu, and the other is this boy, the makeup boy, who was always critical of Subbu. Why? Because this boy, the writer tells us, that this boy had more of a formal education, higher education, although Subbu was not so much of an educated man. And by virtue of being a Brahmin, just Subbu was a Brahmin. So again, a critical sarcasm. This is a sarcasm by the author on Subbu and on the caste system in the South India in those times. He was a Brahmin, so he must have got more situations, affluent situations, than people who met him. Because Brahmins are always in the higher caste in India, have been respected more than the other lower castes or the less privileged classes. So now another thing of Subbu comes up here on our table. He says Subbu had certain good qualities. Now he certainly becomes appreciative of Subbu. It's very important to be cheerful all the time. Subbu had this quality. It's very important to be loyal to your company. He had it. And he was tailor-made for films, as he goes on to say. Not just that, he had always many solutions to the problems that the boss faced at times. Now, one of the very funny example here. It's a very funny example. There was a sequence in which the rat fights the tigress underwater and kills her, but the rat leaves the cubs. He takes pity on the cubs of the tigress and tends them lovingly. Now this is a very funny scene. Sounds funny. How can a rat kill a tigress? But here the boss doesn't know what to do with it. How to portray it. How to picture that scene. How to do that scene. See? But the producer would say how to do it, and Subbu would come up with 4 more ways how to picture that scene. 4 more ways. But again, if the boss was still left unsure, then Subbu would come up with 14 more examples, alternatives, how to put up that scene in the most convincing and most effective way. So Subbu was a very versatile character. Another quality that a job needs, the person whoever is working at a certain job, he needs to be versatile. Subbu had this versatility. Perhaps the office boy whom the writer just dropped before reference to Subbu, he was not as versatile as Subbu was. So because of his versatility, probably because of his caste and his cheerful nature and his always available nature, like I'm available always for every problem, he would come up with many solutions. Another thing that he talks about Subbu was that he was a poet. Poet of the masses, not of the classes. Although sarcastically, again, like I said, he's being sarcastic, funnily sarcastic. There's humor as well in it. He says, though he was certainly capable of more complex and higher forms. Means, though Subbu could have written for more intelligentsia, but he wrote for the common man, for the masses. His poetry was very simple, and look at the sentence here. His success in films overshadowed and dwarfed his literary achievements, or so his critics felt. Now, again, the critics, as he says, there were many critics of Subbu in the whole Gemini studio. So they felt Subbu is more of a literary character, like his literary achievements are lesser than his achievements in the film. Overshadowed means the achievements, that the popularity that he was having in Gemini Studios, the kind of alternatives that he would come up with, and the kind of popularity, like always availability that he always projected about himself. The success in the films, the scene plays, and everything that the studio, the camera demands. That success was more than his literary success. That means his poetry was less, and his film profundity, filmmaking, and scene playing was more. It overshadowed his literary achievements. Again, a satire. Probably Subbu thought himself to be more of a poet, and he came up with a book as well, Thilana Mohanambal, with dozens of very deftly etched characters. I get a feeling that the author is a little sarcastic over here as well. Because he says he wrote a novel, Thilana Mohanambal. Who wrote this novel? Kothamangalam Subbu. He composed many truly original story poems in folk refrain and diction, and also a folk refrain and diction, and also wrote a novel whose name I just underlined, Thilana Mohanambal. And that means he must have had that tendency, proclivity, that talent to write a lot. Here it sounds a little sense, but later in the same breath the author simply goes on to say, in this novel he has dozens of deftly etched characters. Now what do you mean by deftly etched characters? Means dozens of characters in a novel, which means none of the characters must have been exposed. Truly. So probably there's a sarcasm. He's making fun of Subbu, but at the same time a lot of appreciation as well. So Subbu was an amazing actor, but he never aspired to the lead roles. Now this is interesting. Probably again there's a hint of irony or sarcasm here. The author says, the writer tells us, he never wanted to take the lead role as an actor, but he was an amazing actor. He would help, he would always be by the side of the boss, and but whatever subsidiary role he played in any of the films, he performed better than the supposed main actors. Now subsidiary roles, the assistant roles, the second roles, the character roles, or any other roles, the little roles that he was given, he would perform better than the main actors. Which is why, because of all these reasons, he probably went on to become one of his boss's favorites. He seemed very close, I will underline it, he seemed very close and intimate with the boss. He was a very charitable person, a very improvident man. Again, charitable is true. He would come in with charity, help for everybody, and he seemed to have very all sorts of relations near and far. So very popular, like I said. He had genuine love for everyone, as it seemed to, always carrying a very cheerful face. So the boss was fond of him, and As a consequence, this is the word which I wanted to talk about. As the writer tells us, it seemed against Subbu's nature to be even conscious that he was feeding and supporting so many of them. That means he was oblivious of this fact. He did it unselfishly, selflessly, the help that he provided to everybody. So the writer calls him charitable, as he was considered to be charitable and improvident man. Again, there might be an irony in it, but writer is largely appreciable of this character, Uthamangalam Subbu. He had enemies. He had enemies too. Now this is interesting. The closer you get to the boss, more enemies you will be having. Now what the reasons were behind his getting close to the boss, we have discussed. There might be the real reasons, or there might be an irony, sarcasm on the Subbu. But like I said, he had enemies. Author tells us, yet he had enemies. Despite all these qualities, there were enemies, because probably he was so close and intimate with the boss. So there could be a question coming in examination, why was he intimate with the boss? Or another question could come, despite all the good qualities that Subbu seemed to have, why did he have enemies? And he was considered a sycophant also. Now this is a new word which I really want to highlight. Sycophant is a person who says good things, always appeasing things, ear pleasing things to his boss or her boss, so that he remains in the good books of the boss. Without doing any work, or without doing any meaningful work, one can manage to get close to the boss by good things, saying good things to him, always saying yes sir, yes boss, even if the boss might be wrong. That person is called a sycophant. So there was this image of Subbu as sycophant. Writer does not conclude on that. Writer does not confirm this image. He says there could be a sycophancy in his trait, and there were people who were very critical of him. One of those people who were critical of him was this boy who would say direst things about Subbu. Direst things means he's the office boy I just talked before Subbu's introduction. He was the office boy who would say bad things, the baddest, the worst things about Subbu.